Like many kids, I loved cars and bikes and the idea of going fast. And to this day, given the opportunity, I would happily blast around a racetrack in a sports car. However, I wouldn't ever consider myself an expert. So when the Isle of Man recently launched a new set of 50Ps celebrating motorsport on the island, I thought it best to seek out help. So we've come here to the National Motor Museum at Bewley to speak to one such expert and to get an insight into motorsport on the Isle of Man. Some say he has an encyclopedic knowledge of every vehicle here at Bewley, and that when he was born, he came out at 70 miles an hour. All I know is they call him Patrick Collins.
Hi, I'm Patrick Collins and I'm Curator of Vehicles and Research here at the National Motor Museum at Bewley. Now, the National Motor Museum, our remit is to tell the story of motoring on Britain's roads, and within that also motorsport in Britain. And the Isle of Man has been at the heart of British motorsport almost since the beginning. This car is a Napier. It's a 1903 Napier E61, built to compete in the Gordon Bennett Cup races. Britain had won the 1902 Gordon Bennett race in a Napier with SF Edge driving as part of the Paris to Vienna race. Britain won the right to stage the 1903 race. Now, motorsport was banned on British roads, so the Automobile Club lobbied Parliament to find a place where they could stage a road race, and Ireland was part of the United Kingdom at that time, so legislation went through Parliament to allow racing in Ireland, what is now the Republic of Ireland. The 1903 races were held on the Athy circuit, and this was one of 3 Napiers that was entered in the race. This one was driven by Charles Jarrett with a riding mechanic, Cecil Bianchi. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. Jarrett crashed this car on the first lap, overturned it, and Cecil Bianchi was trapped underneath, managed to pull him clear, and they both survived. And in fact, that's how the whole race went. It did not go well for Britain. So the 1904 race went back to Germany. The Automobile Club were pretty dissatisfied with what had gone on, so they really needed to find a better way of recruiting a team for the 1904 races, and they decided to hold an eliminating trial to select the best drivers and cars. Again, they couldn't hold that race in those trials in mainland Britain, so they looked for other venues, and the Isle of Man appealed. So the Manx government ran the legislation through the House of Keys in a few hours, and the right to run a motor race on public roads in the Isle of Man was given. So this car was put back together after the crash in Ireland and was part of one of the cars that was entered in the eliminating trials in 1904. It was driven by Clifford Earp with his brother Arthur as riding mechanic. Did really, really well. The trials were split between a regularity run on a 50-mile course around the island, and then a hill climb, and then a speed trial on Douglas Promenade. Earp did really well in the regularity run, really well in the hill climb, and really well in the speed trial, except on his way back to the start line, went a little bit too fast, lost control of it going over the start line at the start, and crashed into a wall, and the car was totaled again. Controversially, although he'd done enough to become to get second place in the trials, Earp didn't make it into the team for the Gordon Bennett races. But there we go. So this is one of the earliest surviving British racing cars, and at the very start of motorsport in the Isle of Man.
It's a really fascinating car. So what sort of top speed are you looking at out of something
You're
like
looking, this car, it's a 7-litre engine, about 70 horsepower. We'll do 75, 80 miles an hour.
That's fantastic. On something that's what? Basically got push bike brakes?
Yeah, so there's no brakes on the front. It's cable operated brake on the back, and it's a clasp brake, so it's the opposite to a drum. They draw in onto the drum. It's a 3-speed gearbox, very powerful engine, lots of torque. It'll do 30 miles an hour on tick over, so it's a bit of a beast. It's road legal. It's done the London to Brighton run, the annual London to Brighton run, a couple of times in recent years, but it's a bit of a handful. You've got to admire the guys that drove this on, let's face it, roads that weren't up to modern standards, were basically gravel roads on not particularly good tyres, with ineffective brakes.
Yeah. Do I remember you saying that this is, it's got a wooden chassis in places?
Yeah, so big 7-litre engine under there, and then basically the chassis is almost 2 bits of 4x2. It is steel reinforced, but when you look closely along here, you can see where the paint's flaking off. It's basically wood, so quite a lot of flex from a big, heavy, torquey engine.
Scary.
Indeed, yeah, brave men, very brave men.
Very, very brave men.
The first Isle of Man TT motorcycle races were held in 1907. The first race was won by Rem Fowler on a Norton. Not this Norton, this is a slightly later Norton dating from 1912, was actually used for record breaking at Brooklands, but it gives you an idea of what a 1907 TT winning motorcycle looked like. It's basically a bicycle frame with an engine in it. Look at the brakes, essentially it's bicycle brakes. This one's belt drive, some were chain, but essentially it is all bicycle technology with an engine. If we move round here, a few years later, just before the First World War, this is a Royal Enfield. Now, Royal Enfield is one of the great British motorcycle marques, long and glorious history, but it's not been particularly successful at the Isle of Man TT. However, this one was ridden by F.J. Walker in the 1914 Junior TT. It was a 350, and he rode it to 3rd place. It was taken back to the factory a few years later, had a bigger engine in, a 425cc engine, and was kept at the factory. It was only road registered for road use in the 1960s, but it's been here for many years. It is a runner, and we start it up and use it occasionally.
Starting to look like a real motorbike now as well.
Yeah, so the technology, it's still basically a bicycle. We've still got bicycle brakes, but it's a motorcycle chain, and we've got a V-twin here. It's starting to morph into something more like a motorcycle, but it's still basically a bicycle technology under there. Lots of people at that time would have referred to them as a motor bicycle rather than a motorcycle. Brings the TT story up to the 1920s. This is a 1928 Rudge Whitworth. It's a bike ridden by Graham Walker, a famous TT rider who rode in the TT between 1920 and 1936. Took part in road races and Grand Prix racing all over Europe. Rode successively for Norton, Sunbeam and then Rudge Whitworth. Retired from motorcycle racing and went on to edit Motorcycling magazine, and also did BBC radio commentaries for the Isle of Man TT and other motor racing events. And that's how his son, Murray Walker, got into TV and radio and TV broadcasting. Graham rode this bike in the 1928 Ulster Grand Prix. He was leading the senior TT a few weeks earlier and had actually had to retire, but he rode this bike, which is essentially similar, it may even be the same bike, to victory in the Ulster Grand Prix, which was the first road race to be won at a speed of greater than 80 miles an hour. Graham actually won one TT, which was the 1931 lightweight race, and they had a whole string of seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths. He also was a rider in the 1923 and 1924 sidecar TTs, which were the only sidecar races before the Second World War. When Graham Walker retired from journalism in 1957, he came to live at Bewley, and he worked with the late Lord Montague on what was then the Montague Motor Museum, the predecessor of the National Motor Museum. But Graham created, with Lord Montague, our original motorcycle collection. And if you look around our motorcycle collection today, there are many machines that are here because of Graham's connections with the British motorcycle industry. And we have a significant collection of his memorabilia, photographs, recordings. It's a really, really interesting and significant figure. So we move to the post-war period, the 1950s and 60s. Just over there we have a Manx Norton, which is a very typical British racing single of the period, raced by club racers and professionals alike on circuits and on road racing. And it was a Manx Norton similar to that Mike Halewood won the senior TT in 1961. Now Mike Halewood, one of the great heroes of the TT, 14 TT wins between 1961 and 1979. This was the one that he won his first TT on. So this is a Honda RC162. It's a 250cc 4-cylinder, and it was really sort of at the start of what became Japanese domination of motorcycle sport. And For that season, Mike Hailwood's team, which was run by his father, had negotiated with Honda to get a 250 and a 125. In 1961, Mike won the 250cc race on this bike in the morning, and in the afternoon went out and won the 125cc race as well. So that was 2 TTs in one day. And then later in the week, he won the senior TT on a 500cc Manx Norton. And he was actually leading the 350, the junior TT, on an AJS as well when they had mechanical problems and had to retire. So it would have been 4 races in 1 week, but it was 3, which was pretty good. But of course, he went on to win 14 TTs, his last ones in 1978 on a Ducati, in 1979 on a Suzuki. Sidecar racing was reintroduced to the Isle of Man TT in the early 1950s. And by the 1960s, they'd evolved into machines like this. And at a time when the sport was being dominated by outfits powered by BMW engines, this is a BSA-powered Kirby outfit, which was ridden by John Flaxman and Terry Vinicum to victory in the 1968 Sidecar TT. The first Sidecar TT was 1923. Graham Walker, the famous TT rider, who has a strong connection with this museum, was actually, I think, rode to 2nd place in that race as the rider. And they also had a Sidecar TT in 1924. There were no sidecar races after that. There was some discussion whether racing sidecars was actually relevant to road-going sidecars, which were essentially aimed at the family market for people that couldn't afford an Austin 7 or something like that. Sidecars was very much an economic way for a family to become mobile, and there was some discussion whether racing them actually appealed to that market or not. But anyway, they disappeared from the Isle of Man until the early 1950s, and of course are still very much part of the racing scene today. Here we have a selection of crash helmets worn by famous motorcycle racers, TT riders between the 1920s and the 1960s. So Ray Am, Tommy Wood, Alec Bennett, Walter Rusk, Henry Tyrrell Smith, and Mike Hailwood. This one's actually labelled up for when he was later in the 60s when he was riding for MV Agusta. The pudding basin, the classic pudding basin shaped helmet, made from wood and cork and things like that, bits of leather. Dubious amount of protection for the rider should they come off, and a far cry from the safety equipment worn by riders today. And we bring the Isle of Man TT story up to the 1970s now, a period when Japanese bikes are dominating. This is a Kawasaki H1R 500cc, 3-cylinder, water-cooled 2-stroke, and Mick Grant rode this to victory in the 1975 Senior TT at a speed of 102 miles an hour, so significantly slower than the 136 miles an hour that the guys are lapping at the moment. He also won the F1 race, the 750cc race that week, and broke the outright circuit record, which was previously held by Mike Hailwood.